Okay, here comes some folks joining in now. Some familiar Florida faces, it looks like, joining into the participant list. That's great. Hi, everyone. My name is Nick Houle. I'm the Director of Client Engagement here at the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative, and I'm going to be running kind of some housekeeping stuff here at the front end of the webinar, and then we'll also be doing a Q&A later in the session that I'd be happy to read out any comments, questions, concerns, thoughts that you have as you put those in the chat. So as we let folks roll in here, if you wouldn't mind putting your name and where you're calling in from, it would be just great to see where we're getting some representation from. I know we've got, like I said, a few folks from Florida, but maybe there's some other folks from across the country or even some international folks that are joining. Hi, Dee. It's great to see you. And Teresa. Dee and Teresa are both partners of ours at Daytona State College, which is a great partner of ours.
Career Source. Yeah, we got a lot of friends at Career Source.
Yes, Career Source.
Yep. Trish, welcome. Robin King. Robin's back. Hi, Robin. Great to see you here. Geez, we have a lot of friends in Florida, Nick. It's crazy.
Yeah, we really do.
Yeah. So much of our work is there. It's and I forgot to mention this, but we also are working at, we have some infiltrators at what's the college, Nick, in St. Petersburg? Why, it just went out of my head. Liberal Arts College in St. Petersburg.
Eckerd College. Yep.
Eckerd College. Yeah. We got a lot of friends at Eckerd College that are trained facilitators, and they are running the Ice House program there as well.
Correct. Yeah. Hi, Dr. Weems. Great to have you on with us. All right. Well, it looks like things are kind of slowing down in the chat. So just a couple quick things. We are recording this, as you should have heard when you joined on. We're so excited to have Dr. Mack with us here. This recording will go out within 24 hours of the session ending, just depends on upload times, things like that. But without further ado, feel free to put any questions you have throughout the session in the chat or the Q&A function. Both of those you'll see along the bottom of your Zoom window. So just feel free to pop those in whenever, and I'll make sure to flag those. I'll also be popping any links that Gary or Henry mention, to resources, books, things like that they might mention. I'll put those in the chat as well. All right, I'll get out of your hair and let you two get to chatting.
Sounds good. Thank you, Nick. And thank you everyone for joining us. I'm super excited to have this conversation with Dr. Mack. Well, we met, 6 months ago at a conference in Orlando. I heard Dr. Mack speak about the importance of entrepreneurship and education. I said, man, I got to learn more about what this guy is doing. So as a brief introduction, Dr. Mack currently serves as Chancellor at the Florida Department of Education, positions he's held since 2019. As Chancellor, Dr. Mack leads the Division of Career, Technical, and Adult Education. While doing so, he oversees all workforce education programs and economic development initiatives for the department. His division is responsible for all career and technical education programs across a system of 48 technical centers and colleges, 28 state community colleges, and K-12 public schools, with a combined enrollment of over 1 million students annually. Wow, that's some serious impact. Dr. Mack, welcome to our webinar series.
Thanks so much, Gary. It's great to be here.
So as I said, Dr. Mack, Henry, I got to remember this. We met about 6 months ago, sometime last summer at this conference in Florida, and you were talking about the importance of entrepreneurship. I just want to start by asking you, how did you find yourself at this intersection of entrepreneurship and education?
Yeah, I guess maybe like most entrepreneurial related activity, it started with a mentor or a person that had a profound impact on my way of thinking about how to think and how to educate. And that was a former college president at Broward College, J. David Armstrong, who was former chancellor of the Florida college system here in Florida, and sort of an entrepreneur in his own right. He owned some businesses, but also was sort of really entrepreneurial within the structure of higher ed. And I kind of always found that, first of all, attractive, second of all, inspiring, and third of all, I guess maybe as part of attractive, it's exciting. It was exciting to be part of a culture and of to be associated with a leader who was not afraid of disruption and innovation. And who saw not only the potential of entrepreneurial ways of acting and thinking for the improvement of the college, but understood then the power of entrepreneurship to affect social and economic change for students. Since it was our mission at Broward College to, as an open access institution, to uplift lives. Well, how do you do that in the most effective and transformative way possible? Well, one of the ways was to embed entrepreneurship education and training into the curriculum. And Gary, it was through him, frankly, that, I became sort of an apostle, if you will, of entrepreneurship education and training. I'll stop there, and then sort of things took off, ever since.
Yeah. So Henry, was he like teaching you specifically things, or were you learning that from the observation of just following him around, or like, how did that knowledge get transferred to you?
That's a great question. I was a low-level administrator at the time, so I don't think he ever knew who I was at the time. So it was just more of his example as a president that sort of, resulted in cultural change within the college. Then, as I was promoted and whatever, I became personal friends with him, and then sort of really understood his vision for the college. And then that then resulted in my own research and discovery for the programs and for the faculty and for the departments that I then oversaw, and how this then could be effective not only for our day-to-day operations, but also to how it can improve student retention and success, and ultimately then the ability of the students to become their own business owners, or to be successful entrepreneurs in whatever employment or company they end up in, right?
Oh, Henry, we could just end right there, and that's just a bomb right there. I mean, that's what people don't get. It's not just about starting a business. That if you look at, entrepreneurial attitudes and skills, they're 21st century skills. They're the same damn skills. They're the same thing. And I've been thinking about this a lot. The skills gap is a mindset gap, right? It's like entrepreneurial skills they're not technical skills, they're adaptive skills. And I think that's what's kind of missing. Like, people we default to this thinking that entrepreneurship is a business system. Okay, that's just for kids who want to start a business. And I think that's just a wrong way to think about it.
Yeah, totally. That's a happy consequence, an indirect effect of what we are proposing as a great mechanism for retention and completion and success as a human being in the workplace.
100%.
Right? If they were to start their own business, or if faculty for example, were to start their own businesses as a result and innovate and pivot and whatnot, that's great. But it sort of comes second place to the primary aim, which is to cultivate those employability, those durability skills, those human skills, right, that we're all familiar with. I don't like the phrase soft skills, since whatever, but I think we all know what we're talking about here. And then, so that was within sort of the higher education structure. And then when I became chancellor and started to oversee all K-12 activity across the state of Florida, at least with respect to CTE, we enroll about 700,000 students annually in career and technical education at the K-12 level. I thought to myself, well, there's no reason why they should be not afforded the opportunity to be exposed to these ways of thinking, acting, and sort of understanding itself.
Basic competencies, basic entrepreneurial competencies. Like, every student should be exposed to those.
Absolutely.
Right.
If I have my 6-year-old now, she's starting to think about things in new, innovative ways. And, certainly I would want her exposed to the entrepreneurial mindset and to sort of cultivate those habits to make her principally a better human being and professional potentially, right?
Yeah, I mean, the way I think about it sometimes, Henry, it's that like learning how to think like an entrepreneur not only equips students with the attitudes and abilities that enable them to adapt and thrive amidst complexity and change, but it also equips them with the attitudes and skills that enables them to make a greater contribution to the communities and the organizations and the societies they inhabit. I mean, you know, but there's a point that you started to make a moment ago I want to come back to I think this is where you're going, Henry. It's like we think of entrepreneurship and we think about the economic impact or the economic benefits. And that's not controversial. I mean, it's well established. But I think what we don't often consider is the developmental benefits. And I think if we were to focus on the developmental aspects of entrepreneurship, the resilience, the resourcefulness, the creative and critical thinking, right? The agility, those kinds of things, the economic benefits would take care of themselves. But we continue to just frame it as a business discipline. We're creating this bounded rationality that's just limiting our ability to embrace it more fully.
That's just how we work as perhaps maybe encultured utilitarians that I think generally for the most part, our society operates within that framework.
Yeah.
Where we wonder immediately about the effect and the utility of the initiative.
Yeah. I think that's evolutionary. I think you're right.
And the measurability of it. And when you're in an environment, when you're in an education environment that is constrained by funding and pressures from all angles, you, in order to survive as an administrator or as a faculty member over a particular program, you have to justify your existence based on the economic end, or based on the measurable output, or based on the thing that I think you and I maybe lament as a justification for embedding entrepreneurship education and training. That's the justification we have to hang our hat on at the end of the day. And it's unfortunate because I think, to your point, it overshadows, right, the psychosocial developmental good that this.
It's not immediately obvious either.
No, and it's not, and it's harder to track, right? It's
harder to measure. It's not
totally. It's hard to connect it to completion and retention and post-economic outcomes. But we know with some confidence, and anecdotally, we don't have longitudinal data yet, but we do know as a function of local grant awards or local efforts, we're seeing increases in completion and success rates and post-completion outcomes. But that aside, you know, it's sort of the world we live in. Back to the prior point about how economic aims sort of overshadow the inherent good that this is for individuals.
Henry, I'm kind of torn here because I just realized that, like, you are an entrepreneurial educator. You're like an intrapreneur yourself. And I don't know whether I should be interviewing you from that perspective, because I mean, just to hearing you talk and hearing about the influence of your mentor, it just got me to think about, man, what if we had, you know, people throughout government institutions that learn how to think like entrepreneurs. Throughout the system of education, like, wow. You know, and you know,
I just got this book. I don't know. Have you seen this? The Bureaucratic Entrepreneur?
No.
By Richard Haas. I haven't read it. I hear it's great for those that are on the call. And because I'm interested, frankly, Gary, in your point, how to be effective within a bureaucratic organization that is, for example, a state agency that employs over 3,000 people. It's not that easy. It's not easy to innovate, right? Especially when the very existence of the education sector is defined in statute with accompanying rules and regulations. And so how do you do good by way of students and force innovation in a structure that is not all that nimble, right?
Right.
And really that's to your point, like the benefit of this education, however, it's infectious. It impacted me. So I would like to think that our efforts here in Florida not only are good for students, but are also in some way, form, or fashion transforming the institutions that are sort of a part of our network or our state group, right?
Yeah, sort of like a bottom up kind of
Yeah.
Trojan horse, almost kind of a method of change. But you also said something interesting. And by the way, Henry, you know, lest anyone on this call think that like government, you know, bureaucracies can't be entrepreneurial. The city of Albuquerque is in the process of putting approximately 6,000 city government workers through our Ice House program.
Oh, that's great.
And you know, Henry, I was like really skeptical in the beginning, like, whoa, you can't teach a city government worker how to think like an entrepreneur. And they put initially like 100 people through. I mean, it's crazy, like the law director, sanitation supervisor, like, you know, pretty wide array of, and all of a sudden, like like little changes started percolating up.
Sure.
The sanitation worker figured out how to save the city like $250,000 a year. One of the guys from the accounting office got promoted 3 times. They had to change the law because he wasn't allowed to. It just, to your point about the mentor you had, like once you sort of awaken yourself to the fact that you can affect change in your sphere of influence, whatever that is, it's hard to put that genie back in the bottle.
Totally, right? And when you marry it up with your own personal passion, desire, and sort of interest, right? What you yourself are existentially sort of excited about. When you marry this up with that, that's when it really is unbelievably transformative, right? And incidentally, this can be a mechanism, entrepreneurship education and training, to your point, Gary, and what you've been leading on, this can awaken within students and with individuals across organizations what you are supposed to do in life, right? And
like you're freaking, you're just like they're speaking my language. That's exactly it.
And there's one other point, I don't want it to be lost on people listening. None of this would happen, frankly, if we did not have the leadership in Florida that publicly encourages it. So all credit, frankly, goes to the governor, Governor Ron DeSantis, and my boss, Commissioner Richard Corcoran, who have said time and time again, status quo no more. The fact that we always did it this way is not a legitimate excuse. Let's do things differently. And if we didn't have the leadership from across the street or internally, it wouldn't be happening. And I'm imagining the same is true in Albuquerque too.
Yeah.
You need that buy-in from above.
It's a top-down, bottom-up strategy. And there's an interesting idea emerging. It's complexity leadership theory, which is the idea that you still need bureaucratic, top-down managerial systems. Like that's still important for the distribution and replication of useful things. But alone, it's not enough. You also need, in addition to the managerial, you need the entrepreneurial. So it's not one or the other. But the rub here, and this comes back to education, Henry, I'd love to hear what you say about this, but you know, bureaucratic organizations are typically focused on replication, efficiency, orderliness, linearity, structure. And those environments, as you have already indicated, are not conducive to the development of entrepreneurial attitudes and skills, which are focused on the discovery of useful things rather than the delivery of them.
Yeah.
And our students need both. There's a time to lead, there's a time to follow. I mean, that's kind of how I'm thinking about it. I want to make sure that's clear to the audience. We're not saying just drop everything, run off, you know, we're not advocating like anarchy in the classroom, right? You still got to deliver something at the end of the day. And I think that's you were, you know, my model of entrepreneurship, Henry, is sort of modeled after Jim Collins' idea. Preserve the core of what you're doing, but carve out some modicum of time and energy and resources to explore in the margins. You know, you and I were talking right before we came on, when we came live, about all the myths around entrepreneurship. And, you know, you were talking about it doesn't take money to start a business, or the idea that you need money to start a business is a myth. The idea that entrepreneurship is all about risk is a myth, right? It's about, I mean, I've looked at studies that show like experienced entrepreneurs are actually more risk averse than non-entrepreneurs. They just intuitively have learned where the landmines are buried, and they know how to avoid, they know how to micro experiment. They don't, you know, it's not a play it safe or go all in. It creates a false dichotomy, I guess what I'm saying.
Yeah. We're not about false dichotomies, and we're not about either or propositions here. Right.
Yeah.
And to your point about carving space out within the margins or within the periphery or within your existing swim lanes is a good point. That's sort of how you begin to chip away at change and to discover new insights where not otherwise possible, because practically speaking, we still have to live, and we still have to maintain our jobs, and we still have to follow the rules and regulations that sort of govern our lives, right? But there are moments for discovery and innovation that need to be seized upon. And I guess what entrepreneurship education and training does is, right, first of all, maybe teach you how to find where those are, to pay attention to them, and to convert them into moments of discovery and you know, and innovation.
Yeah.
And it's so important for students to your point, Gary, right? I mean, you want students thinking like that, acting like that, inculcating those habits, right? We don't want to graduate mindless, you know, graduates, or graduates who are deadened to creativity or innovation, or just numb to the possibilities of new things. You know, the education system itself is already too rigid and conformist, and perhaps somewhat stifling. And so we risk a lot if we don't find ways like this to excite the mind in the ways that I think entrepreneurship education and training does. And so I have an interest here because I'm over workforce education and career and technical education, which is about hard skill cultivation.
Yeah.
You know, principally, we're focused on giving you, Gary, the tools you need to know how to code, or know how to pass a certification exam, or understand the ins and the outs of, I don't know, computer networking systems, or knowing how to weld or manufacture or use a new CNC Haas machine, right? Those are pretty spelled out, well-defined, prescribed, already baked in stone learning outcomes and skills that you have to know. And we, by we, I mean the governor and the commissioner, did not want to perpetuate or to continue down the route of just graduating mindless, technically trained, skilled workers. We know that it's important to do these things and to help students understand the value of innovative, creative thinking, especially CTE students. That it's just not healthy otherwise, right?
Yeah.
And this is the way we've decided to do it. So, right, for those that are on the call, I would encourage you to reach out to your state agency and talk to the CTE director. Every state has one, and talk to them about the use of their federal Perkins dollars and federal WIOA dollars to support innovative grant opportunities to help scale entrepreneurship education and training. I mean, that's how we're doing it. We have leadership monies afforded to us to help do this. And it's relatively an easy thing to pull off.
So what you're saying is like anybody in another state could do what you're doing.
Yeah.
There's nothing unique about Florida.
No.
It's the only thing unique is like your mindset, your Henry, like your entrepreneurial mindset, seeing the importance of it. That's the only thing that's unique. Yeah. That's super interesting. But something I want to come back to that you said a few minutes ago, Henry, is like, the way entrepreneurship education ignites the student and creates this like really, really powerful incentive to learn. And I think what we're nibbling around the edges of here, if I understand you correctly, is intrinsic motivation. And once a student becomes intrinsically motivated, they're, as you so well stated, when they're pursuing their own interests and developing their own abilities in ways that can contribute to something greater than themselves, they become intrinsically motivated. They become optimally engaged. They tap into the most potent form of human motivation. And when that happens, our jobs become not only easier, but immensely more satisfying, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's how it should work. So Henry, tell me like what's working? Like, what are some of the projects you guys are working on that you see like that have promise?
Yeah. I would point to maybe two things. One is the successful adoption of Intuit's certifications on what we have in Florida is the CAPE funding list. So this is a funding mechanism, an incentive structure that the state funds every year to help scale certification attainment in select areas. And typically those are hard skill areas like IT or manufacturing or supply chain and logistics. And so we were successful in passing or getting on the CAPE list to draw down funding, the entrepreneurship and small business certification by Intuit. In addition to the design thinking certification, which are two different certifications. Design thinking is more about the mindset, right? Entrepreneurship and small business is more about the practical skills associated with de-risking an idea, owning a business, this, that, and the other, market validation, and all of those things. And it was important to have both for the reasons that we've already discussed. And that matters for educational systemic change because funding drives behavior and people can't act and innovate if the state is not funding. And there is a lot of funding attached here in Florida to certifications that are on this list called the CAPE list, C-A-P-E, the Career and Professional Education Act. It provides money for teacher bonuses. So every teacher that has a student that passes a certification gets a bonus. So for every certification passed, the teacher gets more money. And there's money that flows to the program itself. So great incentive structure that will get you a long way. The fact that we were able to do that is unbelievable. And the fact too that we are supporting local grants through our Perkins dollars. If you go to the website, Florida Department of Education website, and just Google Florida Department of Education, Entrepreneurship, Education, and Training, you'll see how we've rolled out these grant awards. And we're funding initiatives that are high impact, medium impact, low impact. So if a school district or a state college is just getting into the business and sort of wants to understand how to do entrepreneurship, they can go for low impact, $25,000 to maybe just start certifying faculty, start professional development, this, that, and the other. $50,000 if they want something more robust done, or $100,000 if they want something really robustly done. And we're looking at tweaking that a bit to see if there's a way to sort of roll out more money that can be more impactful now that we've done it a couple of years. But those are the two big programs, right? The Perkins grant program and the CAPE program that results in money. And like I said, funding drives behavior. So if you believe in something as a state or as a school district, You have to incentivize
Yeah.
to make it happen. Practically, that's sort of the practical swim lanes that we were alluding to earlier, right? So how do you do that, right? And thankfully, you do that with the resources that the state provides and the federal government in the case of Perkins.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of what we do, as you probably know, is train educators how to teach entrepreneurship in the classroom, how to infuse it, regardless, like in an interdisciplinary way. We've trained thousands of educators all over the world. I think we've been, the recipient. We're doing a lot of work with Broward, other colleges, as we mentioned, and workforce development folks like with Robin King and so forth in Florida. I think that's sort of my way of thinking about this, Henry, is almost like I alluded to earlier. It's like a Trojan horse, because student engagement is tied to like the teacher engagement. And I'm always so blown away by the way the teachers respond so positively to entrepreneurship training. And what's so interesting to me, Henry, is it's often the ones that come in with their arms folded. It's the ones that like, entrepreneurship, that's business, it's not for me. And some of our most impactful educators have come from so far afield of the business world.
Yeah.
It's so interesting to me. And I think that's an important point to be made. Like, to my way of thinking, you're absolutely right. You need the top-down buy-in, but if you can get the teacher buy-in, like the students will take it and run. It's not that complicated.
Yeah.
I see Queen. Queen is asking a question here. I want to, Nick, I don't know if there's any more questions. If you all have questions, please chime in. I don't want to dominate the conversation.
Just comments, no questions yet.
Okay.
But Queen, who Henry, I know you've worked with before at Broward College, is saying that she loves the two-prong approach that you're talking about. The EET grant has been impactful at Broward College, definitely.
Yeah.
And Pasco Hernando. Yes, you're absolutely right, Rob. Been good representation of all three of those colleges.
Yeah. Big Tony State. Yeah.
Practically speaking, in order to make anything work in life or in large organizations or small organizations, you need the buy-in, and you need apostles, and you need people who are change agents, and you need people who understand the mission and are enthusiastic about it, right? And so the Queen Davis is sort of, I would say, exemplary of that type of personality that believes in it and is able to help affect change and get faculty to buy into it. And practically speaking, it can't happen without it, right? And so you need to seek out those infectious and fun personalities to
Queen is definitely that. What you're speaking to is super important, Henry. I want to dig into this a little bit deeper. And I've read a little bit about the work of Everett Rogers and the rate at which we adopt new ideas, basically. And it's the bell curve. You're never going to get everybody to buy into an idea right from the rip. It's not going to happen. And there's a great paper that I read. This is geeky as all get out, but it was written like 1940 or something like that. It's called The Adoption of Hybrid Corn Seeds in Two Iowa Communities. And it has nothing to do with corn. They just use this because it's a perfect example of adoption, because they were trying to get farmers to adopt a more robust corn seed. They didn't have to buy any new equipment. They didn't have to learn anything. And so they were able, like sociologists were able to measure it, like at how and who and how they're adopting. And it became a famous study. But the idea is there's an innovator out there on the fringe. And to what you're saying, I think, Henry, is that you find the early adopters, and that's typically 10 or 15%. It's a small percentage of the population, and work with the early adopters. And they will communicate to the early majority, because the early majority, the bulk of the people, people don't like new things. We don't trust new things, and we're not going to buy from the innovator.
Yeah,
we're going to buy from our neighbors.
Yeah.
right? And so that's kind of how it works. I think that's an important point to be made here, that I'm trying to do entrepreneurship education initiatives within any realm. Trying to get everyone bought in from the get-go is a bad idea.
I say that affectionately for my fellow faculty members, of which I'm still a part of the ranks, an active faculty member to this day. And so, it's something within the personality of a faculty member to always greet initiatives from the administration with sort of an air of suspicion, or to read things with a hermeneutic of suspicion, right? And so,
or fatigue.
Yeah,
right.
Which is
Initiative
contributing to the suspicion,
right?
The effect or the cause of it, that's debatable. But the reality is that you're dealing within education with a unique group of individuals that are essential to making this whole thing work. And that's sort of an interesting dynamic that perhaps is not necessarily always accounted for when trying to scale entrepreneurship education and training initiatives, or is perhaps not necessarily part of your Albuquerque initiative, right? I would be interested to sort of understand the dynamic between the state government employees in your Albuquerque sort of example, and how that matches up or is juxtaposed with getting faculty members, on board, and sort of how the nuances of your approach may shift or change depending on those audiences and contexts, right?
Yeah. I mean, what they told me is like they're not using the word ice house as a verb. Like let's ice house this problem. It's like a verb to say like we don't have any real formal authority, we don't have resources, but let's roll up our sleeves and figure out like what we can do to make it better in some small way. It's kind of a use of I don't know.
Yeah.
Of euphemism, but and please, by all means, for those of you who are on the call, start dropping your questions in the chat. We've got about 22 minutes left or so.
Gary, I guess maybe I have a question for you. What are you thinking about in terms of your mission and scaling it really with and among or within the education sector? Like, what would you like to see happen next?
In our company, or more broadly in the education system?
I guess more broadly, and certainly you can use your company as sort of an example.
Yeah. Okay. So I published a white paper about a year ago called The Entrepreneurial Mindset Imperative. We sort of came at this. We launched this product, a curriculum. I co-authored a book called Who Owns the Ice House with the Pulitzer nominee Clifton Talbert. And it came from a research project I did for the Cisco Entrepreneur Institute in San Jose. And they gave me a platform to go around the country and interview hundreds of like typical entrepreneurs. Like, how are they doing it? Newsflash, they're not writing business plans and going after venture capital, right? They're starting with a few hundred, a few $1,000s. And that's how I met my co-author. We co-authored this book. We wrote a curriculum. Kaufman funded it. Off we went to the races. It's gone all over the world. Now I'm trying to get the attention of like policymakers, business leaders, academic leaders, the highest levels. This is an imperative, and we have to redefine entrepreneurship differently in order to embrace it. And you and I talked about that a little bit. So so many challenges that we face today, I think, come back to this, what I would call a managerial mindset. That we recognize the value of entrepreneurial attitudes, behaviors, and skills. We all recognize that. That's very simple. Like the World Economic Forum, United Nations, everyone has recognized that that's essential for creating the societies of the future. But the entrepreneurial process, and more importantly, the causes of entrepreneurial behavior remain a mystery to most people. And that's what we're trying to change. So what I'm actually trying to say, Henry, is we tend to think of entrepreneurship as a business discipline in this binary way. You either are or you're not. And you're either born with it or you're not. And that prevents us from looking at the ways in which our systems of education are systematically inhibiting the development of the very attitudes and skills that are going to be needed for kids to adapt and thrive in the future. So I know that was a lot, but that's the problem we're trying to solve, the mindset imperative. Not everyone wants to start a business. And I say this in a lot of my lectures. How many kids want to start a business? You know, a third of the hands are going to go up, a half to maybe 2/3 at most. And then you ask people, how many people want to discover an opportunity? Like every hand in the room is going up. And that's what I want people to understand, that the desire to discover an opportunity is innate. The desire for exploration and growth is innate. It's in all of us. It's not just in some of us.
Especially at the earlier grade levels.
Absolutely.
Middle school, before we do our thing and make them non-creative, non-energetic students.
That's part of my theory, is that non-creative behaviors learn, non-entrepreneurial behaviors learn.
Yeah.
Right. It's an inverse. People think but again, coming back to this, what a psychologist would call the fundamental attribution error. We tend to look at entrepreneurs as if they're born with some sort of scientifically unfathomable traits. And we continue to organize our learning and working environments in ways that inhibit the very attitudes and skills that we want to develop. We're working against ourselves, right? That's what people don't really get.
Yeah. I'd be interested to know the 4th grade project.
Yeah, I would as well, Timothy. I'd like to see more about that.
What does that
Timothy
entail?
Cornelius. Yeah. I think I know Tim Cornelius.
Yeah, I can read that so everyone can see it. But Tim says, we are doing an entrepreneurial mindset project with 4th graders. Great project. Yeah, Tim, we'd definitely like to hear more about that, because like Henry mentioned, a lot of initiatives that we're seeing are happening in the middle and typically even older. And like you said, Henry, that's kind of after we've started to breed the creativity and the resilience out of students and make them kind of fall into a line. Yeah.
And that's it.
Can't help but think of what's his name? Is it Ken Robinson?
Yeah.
Who makes
Sir Ken.
Point, right? Somewhat infamously so a couple years ago, where he was talking about, again, how I like the way you put that, breed, unfortunately, innovation, creativity, and the ability to pivot, the ability to understand sort of new ventures or see those and seize the moment. Breeding all of that out of students is an unfortunate consequence of the modern contemporary education system. And again,
we can't make that connection.
Yeah.
In psychology, there's this idea of the self-serving bias. We take credit for things when they go well.
Yeah.
And we look externally for blame when things don't go well. So we take credit for the students that are like killing it. And yet, we're lamenting the lack of engagement, and we don't realize like how we're contributing to that.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
Bruce has a great question that I think I'd love to hear Henry's thoughts on, but Gary's, yours as well. Do you have any other ideas about how educators in K-12 and higher ed can work within existing frameworks / requirements / testing requirements to foster an innovative mindset, possibly even in ways that don't require a dedicated intrapreneur unit? And this is John. Sorry, John.
I mean,
Henry,
open to ideas.
I would say yes. And so I'm working on a new book and it about the entrepreneurial mindset, and I coined this term called entrepreneurial discovery learning. And it's building on the work Jerome Brunner, who was a scholar that wrote about discovery learning. That's what's absent. The system is mostly the transfer of explicit knowledge, which we need. But what's missing is like some modicum of discovery learning. I'm putting the entrepreneurial component on it to say, I don't want you just like walking around turning over rocks randomly. I want you to discover new ways to make yourself more useful to other humans.
Yeah, Aristotle made these classical distinctions, in his metaphysics, where he spoke about propositional knowledge, what you're sort of just described as sort of transactional, right? I tell you what I know, you now know it.
Yeah.
It's just mere propositional. It's just exchange of information, which may be useful, right? Then there's applied knowledge, which is how to do something. How to build a boat, or how to build a house, or how to fix one's plumbing system. That's applied knowledge, which again is eminently useful. Then there's philosophical knowledge or metaphysical knowledge, which we can spare everyone from at the moment. But though is itself, I would say, necessary for the kind of discovery that you've talked about, because according to Aristotle, that kind of metaphysical or philosophical knowledge can only come from a culture that supports leisure and the contemplative sort of life or mode. And I'm not talking about running off into a monastery or a cave and just thinking. However, that kind of discovery or innovation that you're talking about, I would submit, cannot occur if we don't find ways to embed those contemplative philosophical moments within the structure of our day-to-day life.
Yeah, that's right.
And especially within students, and teaching them the habit of how contemplative philosophical sort of engagements, how those can be meaningful, beautiful, good, and rich for one's own growth and for one's ability, incidentally, to apply knowledge and to learn propositional knowledge, but more importantly or critically, to sort of discover. And it's really the seed of what Aristotle called wonder, right? Which is sort of the highest form of knowledge and contemplation, when we begin to sort of wonder about things and about existence. And I know I'm speaking very conceptually and philosophically here, but it's really sort of at the heart of Aristotle's understanding of the nature of knowing, his epistemology, and how we've lost a sense of wonder. We've lost a sense of the contemplative life, of the philosophical life, of the ability to sort of, again, see insights into things where we would not have otherwise seen them, or to understand sort of those moments or those opportunities for entrepreneurial ways of thinking and acting, right? And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the same thing Aristotle talked about, just using different terminology. And to the question, Bruce, I suppose, or John, whoever asked it, is maybe that's what's new that needs to be figured out here within the professional development activities, within the co-curricular activities that we can easily point to, within the book clubs and the trainings and the talks that, entrepreneurship education and training sort of results in addition to figuring out how to embed learning outcomes across the curriculum. I mean, those are all obvious things that we do, but maybe it's time to try and figure out a way to help students be with themselves and with their environment in a way that would allow for the kind of discovery, Gary, that you're sort of talking about. And I don't know what that looks like, but it's an interesting thought that's definitely worth exploring, right?
Yeah.
The last point is how needed is this? How needed is that in a day and age when we are wedded to technology and our phones and the sense of immediate gratification and all the ways that comes, when we are embedded in a society that values the immediate result, the immediate pleasure, the immediate gratification, and sort of what that does cognitively to the brain, especially at an early age, is lamentable.
Yeah.
Right? And that's unfortunate. And how can the education system, perhaps through entrepreneurship education and training, help correct against it? It's kind of a neat thing to think about.
It's really an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah.
And you know, to the question about like how do you do this without having a dedicated entrepreneur unit?
Yeah.
You know, in my book, in my new book, what I'm asking of the educator, I'm assuming that the educator is acting on their own, like there isn't room. You can still encourage students to undertake entrepreneurial projects of their own. You know, they don't get graded for it. Try to get them knee deep into it and watch them go, because once they're intrinsically motivated, you know, that's all you're trying to get to. And Nick, if you can post this, I was inspired to write about this from an essay from Paul Graham, the Y Combinator guy. He wrote something about, like, he noticed one day, you know, bringing his kids home from school, his like 9-year-old was super excited about their own project. Like not excited about schoolwork, but super excited about their own project. And that's what caused me to think about it in that way. It is whether you're a student and a teacher, a parent and a child, a manager and an employee, what we need to do is encourage people to undertake entrepreneurial projects of their own in the margins, using discretionary time, thought, and reflection. To your point, Henry, you know, to stop and reflect. If you just get up and do what you've always done, you're going to get what you always got.
Yeah, exactly. And just to piggyback on everything that both of you are saying, Timothy chimed in with a little bit more detail about what they do and why they do what they do with fourth graders. So they choose fourth graders for exactly the point that you made, Henry, that their minds are more elastic still, that they haven't been taught to think in rigid ways at that time. And they're actually using part of our Ice House model. So we have an opportunity discovery canvas that kind of helps foster the initial stages of what both of you were talking about. And they combine that with the lean canvas, the lean startup canvas. And that ties into Economics Arkansas. And then they're also working to inoculate both elementary education majors at a university level to work with fourth graders in their city as part of a social science part of learning. So that's a great way. Teach the people who are learning to be the future teachers how to do this earlier, so that we're not putting it all on the backs of the faculty and the teachers who are already swimming within an existing system. I think that's great.
Yeah, I see a comment here, Nick, from Musa Sadiq.
Yep.
In technical education, such as engineering, where premium is placed on technical skills over the business of the profession, how can we start making engineering students to look towards the business of their courses, even as a student? Henry, I'm going to start with you. I have some thoughts on that, but I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's true, right? Where they are placing a premium over the technical skills, or on the technical skills over
right.
the business of the profession. I mean, I don't, man, how can you start making engineering students look toward the business of their courses, even as a student? I guess I'm kind of curious, what does that mean, looking towards the business of their courses?
Well, I want to answer the question a little more broadly. I mean, the question I would ask anybody in any lecture, in any class is this: what is preventing you from making yourself more useful to more humans? Like we should be asking every student that question, because the more useful we become, the better off we're going to be. But in this comment, what's implicit in this comment is that this student is going to work in an established organization where the useful thing has already been figured out, and you're not going to need the entrepreneurial skills. You're just going to need to learn how to follow the rules. And those are some of the assumptions. That's where the mindset piece comes in.
Yeah.
Because it's these deeply ingrained beliefs and assumptions that we operate on that we don't even know we operate on. Right? The assumption of linearity, of consistency, of stability, of other directedness. That world doesn't exist. But we're educating students as if it still does. And I think there's so many, I mean, even levels of depression in young people. Like there's so much instability in the work environment, in the world. If you don't have the ability to tolerate that ambiguity, you're going to get flattened pretty quickly. Nick, we've only got 5 minutes left. I see a bunch of comments in here. I'm hoping you can help me manage these.
Yeah, don't worry about it. I've got you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and the only thing I was going to add to Musa Sadiq's comment is we last month's version of this series, we had Ted Dintersmith join us, and he talked a lot about that exact question in the sense that we are currently training students for jobs that may be automated out of existence within 20, 30, 50 years. How are we teaching them to think about themselves? And as Gary was so articulately putting it, how are we teaching them to pivot and become useful based on those hard skills, but those technical skills that we're often teaching within a known lane, within a predetermined ordered fashion. Yeah.
Henry, as soon as you started talking about Aristotle, the comments blew up.
Yes.
Maybe too implicit in that question too, right, is the concept of how we shouldn't be training for a job, but for a career. And the distinction there is that don't just focus on the technical skills needed to be employed, but focus on what is needed to sustain yourself over the life of your professional ambition.
And to that point, that's the true definition of a vocation, right? It's not. We see career as you follow a predetermined path of growth within an existing organization or a political, if you're on the political or governmental side of things or whatever. But it's more about the vocation, because that's what you need to sustain yourself, body, mind, and soul. Back to the Aristotle piece.
What's old is new.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. That's right. So just again, to highlight some of these other comments, Queen is highlighting, thank you, Queen, for highlighting our work in redefining entrepreneurship. I did post the white paper Gary referenced earlier, and that's a great, kind of starting place to talk about our work. Martha Rios is saying that some high school teachers are already including a JA, that's Junior Achievement Entrepreneurship Program, where students set up a real business and run it throughout the year. And that's a really useful way to start things. But again, it puts people into that kind of managerial mindset pretty quickly, because they're running a business rather than discovering an opportunity. So that's where we make a distinction there. It's not to disparage junior achievement, but that's only one piece of the puzzle.
Well, that let me just chime in on that front, Nick, and I know you got to go, Henry, here in a minute or two. But I wrote this in this white paper that Nick put the link to it here. That so many of these entrepreneurship education initiatives fail to make that distinction between small business management and entrepreneurship, and they just glom it all together.
Yep.
And what we need people to realize is that the attitudes and skills required to discover an opportunity and the drive to discover opportunity is almost entirely distinct from the attitudes and skills and the drive to exploit that opportunity. And,
that's right.
And the latter being managerial, the former being entrepreneurial. And that's my rub with a lot of the existing programs that are in place. They're calling them entrepreneurship programs. They're actually teaching small business management skills. And that's always going to have a very limited appeal. And that's one part of the problem. The other part of the problem is it's misguiding.
Right.
It's not really giving. It's teaching people to write business plans and go find money and hope to God it works. And that's not what entrepreneurs do.
Yeah. And
we're out of time.
Yeah,
Sorry.
the last comment I'll highlight here is from Dr. Weems, and she's just speaking very specifically, I believe, to Musa's comment. She found a book recently called Teaching the Entrepreneurial Mindset to Engineers, which I posted a link to the Google Books version of. So, hey, talking directly to that comment. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah,
This is great.
yeah, yeah.
It's been great, Gary. Really do appreciate you and everything that you do. And it's been great to have you as a partner here in Florida. And I know that many of our institutions are excited to work with you. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Henry. Thanks for spending time with us. I know you got a busy schedule and you got to go. Be respectful of everyone's time. Thanks for joining us for this webinar. As you know, we're the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative. We focus on entrepreneurial mindset education, training, and professional development for academic organizations, corporations, government, nonprofit organizations around the world. We will follow up with you with a link to all of this, to this video, to the chat, and more about the work we do. If you want to know about our professional development programs, our next public facilitator training is coming up in April, I think, Nick.
Yep, that's right.
And
April.
we'll also put a link to that in a follow-up email if you're interested in becoming a certified ELI facilitator. So thanks everyone for joining us. See you on the next webinar next month.
Have a good one, everyone.